بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا وحبيبنا ونبينا محمد وآله وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين. A continuing study of or reading of Allama Iqbal's Reconstruction of Religious Thought Islam, and today we are going to start from here. Such being the nature and promise of the universe. So he has already discussed these things and we looked at it in detail in the previous sessions. What is the nature of, now he is turning to the nature of man. So he talked about nature of the universe according to the Quran in his view, and now he is turning to the nature of man. So in that sense he is picking up the correct topics or the correct concepts and trying to describe the Quranic view about them. But what we have found so far is that he is reading too much of his conception of what science is into the Quran. So he's trying to, and it will become clear when you start talking about about science in explicitly. So he's sort of paving the way for his discussion about science and Islam and the Quran. Anyway, so the nature of man. Such being the nature and promise of the universe, what is the nature of man? So now he's going to talk about the nature of man. Whom it confronts on all sides. So the the relationship between the confronts. I mean, we shouldn't read too much into the word, but the choice of word is, I think, appropriate to his conception here, because as we will see, so this Promethean conception of human being is key to Allama Iqbal's understanding of the Quran and his understanding of the human being and their place in the universe. So his conception of, so let's look at it a bit closely. So he's going to look at first he looked at the nature of universe. And the universe seems to be creative as well. And there he mentioned the promise of God. And then the duty following that promise. The promise, the alleged promise and the alleged duty which he derived from the Quran. The promises that God will subjugate nature to man, to the man, and then his or her duty is to study the universe and try to reflect on the signs of God in the universe and discover the means of realizing his conquest of nature. This is a promise of God, but our duty is to actually actualize that promise. And the actualization of the promise would be when human beings can are through their study, reflection on the signs of God, which is nature, and discover the means of realizing his conquest of nature. So he has already told us conquest of nature is the duty of man. So that's basically corresponds to the 19th century and early 20th century nows of the time of the modernity. Conquering nature is a duty. So if you want to conquer something, it means that your basic relationship with the universe is confrontational. And that's the early humanistic scientific outlook as well, confrontational. Sort of we find in Faust and other writings as well. So so the man's relationship with the universe and man is going to be necessarily confrontational, because you're trying to conquer the universe. And if you need to conquer something, it means that it's not easily pliable to you, or it's going to subjugate itself to your will. You would have to go through some processes. I mean, then it might fight back, as we have seen. It is fighting back. So this is a particular, very clearly a modernistic outlook. Nothing to do with Islam. I mean, he's reading Quran. So people talk about he's reading the Quran in the light of this modernistic outlook, which sees the basic relationship between nature and man as confrontational. The only difference is Allama Iqbal is providing the Quranic justification for this. And this is even different from a later modernistic conception, or later postmodernistic conceptions, when the disaster wreaked by humans on the nature made even modernists realize that you have to tame that stupid desire to conquer nature, because nature is fighting back with all its vengeance. It's even not a Heideggerian viewpoint, where you see being in the world as, so your essence is being in the world. So you don't see world as a confrontational, but you have a basic primordial relationship between the universe. You are from this universe. Although this is the later Heidegger. The Heidegger of being and time still is close to this confrontational outlook. So what I'm trying to say is, this is a typical modernistic, and nothing to do with the Quranic teaching, because the Quran, in the Quranic teaching, universe is the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And man is also the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And our basic relationship with the universe is that we both are the creatures of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And and what Islam teaches us is that our relationship with the universe is that of trust as the bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, about which bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we will be questioned in this life and in the life afterwards, or in the life hereafter, about this trust, whether we treated these bounties with due diligence and without exploitation, and with the eye to thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and worshipping. So that's a totally different concept. So I did say not to read too much on that word conference, but on reflection here, I realized that actually we can read all this into that word, because he has already made it clear that what the relationship between the man and universe is, which is basically confrontational and the relationship of subjugation and conquest and all those things. Okay, so such being the nature and the promise of the universe, what is the nature of man, whom it confronts on all sides? So the relationship between the man and universe is confrontational, which will further clarified by endowed with the most suitable mutual adjustment of faculties. That's his reading of the verse down. He discovered that the man discovered himself down below in the scale of life, surrounded on all sides by the forces of obstruction. See, obstruction. So his confrontation and obstruction. So God has given him the best of faculties, but through whatever reason he has degraded himself by subjugating himself or bowing to the universe, and now he finds himself confronted by this universe, and his wishes and will is obstructed by this universe. Again, very typical modernist view. So what does he or she do in order to jump back into the ladder of life? What does she do? She should go back to her duty to conquer the nature and heed to the promise of God. So Allama Iqbal's view is that human beings were created it's a bit of Feuerbachian view, not even a bit, very substantially Feuerbachian view, early Feuerbach anyway. The sort of the Feuerbach which Marx, the middle Marx, or was fascinated with the humanistic Marx, the so-called humanistic Marx, as if he could transcend humanism. I mean, I guess you could, but anyway, human beings. So they are perfect creation. They were created perfect. But then this supposedly ladder of life, or scale of life, where humans are up with God or just below God. And then everything else is below them and at their service in the universe. And that was God's promise. But since human beings ignored God's promise and ignored their duty to, establish their kingship, lordship, as Shaitan instructed them to, mulkin la yabla, kingship and lordship, instead of imposing their kingship and lordship on the universe, they bowed to universe because of their ignorance of the promise and the duty, or oblivion of that promise and duty. So then human beings who were perfect being, they became the worst of beings. That's Allama Iqbal's modernistic conception. So in order to go back to his professors, to go back to your duty to reflect and prepare yourself to impose your lordship on all the things in the universe. This is his conception, and now he will bring in Quran and read Quran through this conception. I mean, one of the things is this myth about Allama Iqbal's clothes. I don't deny that, he had a clothes. He read Quran, especially later in his life, regularly, and he loved Quran. And in his poetry, you can see that, and in this book, you can see that as well. But we have already seen is, how weak his understanding of the Quran is, and most importantly, he's imposing his modernistic view on the Quran. He's reading it into the Quran. He's not opening his heart to the Quran, in the sense that he's not subjugating or subjecting his modernistic view to the Quran to, correct them. On the other hand, he's imposing his modernistic views on the Quran. That's the thing is, this Quran, yudillu bihi man yasha wa yahdi, that's the meaning of it. If you try to impose your external meaning on the Quran, it will let you, because as Hazrat Ali alayhi salam said, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu wa karramullah wajhahu al-kareem, al-Quran is, hammal, kasir al-wujuh. I'm not sure whether these are his exact words, but that's what he meant. It has many dimensions, so you can actually read many things into it. But that's not how a mu'min or Ahl-Iman believers should read the Quran. Believers should open their heart to the Quran and succumb their heart to the Quran and their understanding to the Quran rather than the other way around. But let's see how now the next ayah of Surah Al-Alaq, he reads it exactly in this way, to basically provide justification for this view which I have just explained to you, and which Allama Iqbal has, basically described and explained in this paragraph which we just read, or these sentences we just read. Okay, so excuse me. So, such being the nature and the promise of the universe, what is the nature of man whom it confronts on all sides? Endowed with a most suitable mutual adjustment of faculties and perfection, he discovers himself down below in the scale of law, surrounded on all sides by the forces of abstraction. And then he quotes two ayahs from Surah Al-Alaq, that of the goodliest fabric we created man. There's no doubt, then brought him down to the lowest of the low. I mean, the goodliest fabric we created him as our servant. But instead of serving us, he served Shaitan and his desires, so he went back down to the lowest of the low, like Iblis before him went. That's what the Quran is saying, but Iqbal is interpreting it to mean that God had created man as a perfect being with the promise to conquer the nature, subjugate the nature to him and the universe to him. But instead of uptaking that duty, he subjugated himself to the nature, and through that he or she degraded himself, and now he finds the universe dictating him rather than he dictating the universe. That's how he reads it. Let's look at the actual ayah. So the ayah is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ, the species of human beings, في أحسن تقويم, in the ahsan in Arabic language doesn't mean the perfect, it means the best of. So it's comparative because it's mutafdil. It's always for comparison. Ahsan taqweem, like in a best in the best of in structure, in its nature, and as I said, best of stature. These are so. Imam Piqtal's translation, surely we create a man of the best stature. Not the best, of the best, yeah. We have indeed created man the best of molds, yeah. And the mold is, as Imam Suyuti said, Ta'dil li surati, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made us, as He made everything, into ahsan taqweem. But since He gave us freedom, we, through our free choice, through our action, went back. Summa radadnahu asfala safilin. Summa radadnahu, not the whole species, but some of its member who rebelled against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, asfala safilin. Or it can be a kinaya to, old age. As Imam Sayyuti said, Kina anil harim wa da'af fayanqas amalul mu'min an zamid ash-shabab wa yakunu lahu ajruhu bi qawli ta'ala. Then we returned him to the lowest of low. But the obvious reading of these ayahs also that then through his action he returned to the lowest of low through following shaitan. And that's clear from the next ayah, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ فَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونٍ. Illa manahu lakin, but those people who believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do good deeds, that is worship Him, they have their reward. They are not the one, they are exempted from this rule. So that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying. But Allama Iqbal, as we saw, is reading it in through his modernistic outlook, which is early modernistic outlook, 19th century, early 20th century modernistic outlook, which sees the conquest of nature as the right of man. So a humanistic blasphemy. He's reading this humanistic blasphemy into the Quran. And that's a wrong way to read the Quran. Okay, let's go back to the text. So let's reread it and then stop here for today. Such being the nature and the promise of the universe, what is the nature of man whom it confronts on all sides? Endowed with the most suitable mutual adjustment of faculties, he discovered himself down below in the scale of life. Surrounded on all sides by the forces of destruction, that of goodliest fabric we created man, then brought him down to the lowest of the low. Okay, let's stop here and we'll continue inshallah from next time from here. And how do we find him in this environment? Okay.